Tell her to leave. Matteo Moretti's cold command stunned everyone in the room. The curvy kindergarten teacher had barely finished introducing herself before the city's most feared mafia boss rejected her in front of politicians, billionaires, and senior capos. Embarrassed, Olivia quietly apologized and turned to walk away. A respected senator immediately stepped forward, offering to escort her out with kindness. Before Olivia could accept, Matteo's voice stopped them both. "Senator," he said, without looking away from her, "I told her to leave. I never gave you permission to accompany her." Every conversation died instantly. If he wanted her gone, why wouldn't he let another man comfort her? The Moretti Foundation headquarters looked nothing like the intimidating fortress Olivia Carter had imagined. Instead of marble statues celebrating wealth, the lobby displayed children's paintings in colorful frames. Handwritten thank you cards from schools across the city covered one entire wall. Finger-painted rainbows sat beside photographs of scholarship recipients and smiling teachers. Olivia couldn't help smiling. "So this is where all the magic happens," she murmured. The receptionist returned her smile. "You must be Miss Carter." Olivia nodded. "I hope I'm not late." "Not at all. The education committee is gathering upstairs." As the elevator climbed, Olivia adjusted the loose sleeves of her navy blue dress. She never worried much about expensive clothes. Comfortable shoes mattered far more when your workday involved chasing energetic 5-year-olds around a classroom. Her tote bag held folders filled with drawings from her students. One little boy, Ethan, had recently won the Moretti Foundation's National Young Dreamers Award after drawing a picture titled, "The Teacher Who Makes Monsters Smile." The judges had loved the innocent explanation written underneath. "Miss Carter says, angry people are just sad people wearing loud voices." The sentence had somehow gone viral online. Olivia still thought the attention was ridiculous. "I only said what children already understand," she whispered to herself. The elevator doors opened. Several elegantly dressed committee members stood chatting outside the conference hall. The moment they noticed Olivia, conversations softened. Not because she had done anything wrong. She simply looked different. Unlike the polished executives in designer suits, Olivia carried crayons sticking out of her canvas bag. One elderly woman smiled warmly. "You must be Ethan's teacher." "I am." "He talks about you constantly." Olivia laughed. "I hope only the good stories." "Oh, apparently you once convinced 30 crying children that broccoli gives superheroes curly hair. It worked." "For how long?" "About 6 minutes." The woman chuckled. "Still impressive." The atmosphere relaxed immediately. That happened often. People rarely stayed nervous around Olivia for very long. An assistant hurried toward them, carrying a stack of folders that suddenly slipped from his hands. Pages scattered across the hallway. Oh dear. Before anyone else reacted, Olivia crouched beside him.
"No worries."
Within seconds, she had sorted every document into neat piles. "You color-code your tabs," she observed. He blinked. "How did you notice?" "I organize finger paints every morning." He laughed despite himself. "I suppose that's excellent training. It prepares you for almost anything." The assistant thanked her repeatedly before rushing away, still smiling. The elderly woman watched the exchange with amusement. "I understand why children adore you. They're very easy to adore first." Before the conversation could continue, another assistant approached Olivia. "Miss Carter, would you mind bringing these award certificates into the executive meeting? They've been waiting for them." "Of course." He pointed toward a pair of tall wooden doors. "They're expecting documents." Olivia balanced the certificates carefully against her chest. "I'll be right back." She knocked once. No answer. Assuming the meeting had already begun, she gently pushed the door open. The room fell silent. Not ordinary silence, the heavy kind. Around a long, polished table sat some of the city's most influential people. Government officials, foundation directors, senior capos from the Moretti syndicate. Large maps covered one wall. Several security photographs lay scattered across the table. At the head of it all sat Matteo Moretti. He didn't look up immediately. His attention remained fixed on one document. Only after several seconds did his eyes lift toward the unexpected visitor. Sharp, controlled, unreadable. Olivia instantly realized she had entered the wrong room. "I'm so sorry," she said quickly. "I was told someone needed these certificates." No one answered. One capo subtly reached toward the inside of his jacket. Another quietly gathered several confidential files. Matteo closed a folder with deliberate calm. His voice was perfectly even. Who authorized her entry? No one spoke. Olivia felt every pair of eyes settle on her. The warmth she'd felt downstairs vanished. "I apologize," she repeated. "I'll leave immediately." Matteo stood. His tailored black suit seemed almost too simple for someone with such commanding presence. He walked toward her without haste. Stopping several feet away, he looked directly at her. Not hostile, not angry, simply assessing. Then he spoke 4 words. "Tell her to leave." The sentence landed harder than if he had shouted. One security officer stepped forward. "This way, miss." Olivia swallowed. "I understand." She offered an embarrassed smile to the room. "I'm terribly sorry for interrupting." No one returned the smile. She turned toward the hallway. Behind her, the conference doors closed with quiet finality. Inside the room, one of the senior capos finally exhaled. "Boss." She saw almost nothing. Almost. Matteo's gaze remained fixed on the closed door. Almost is enough. The room understood exactly what he meant. Sensitive names. Protected witnesses. Children under the Foundation's care whose identities could never become public. Even an innocent teacher didn't deserve to become entangled in matters that could place her in danger. One director hesitated. "Should we explain?" "No, but she'll misunderstand." "I know." He picked up the confidential file once more. "Better she thinks I'm rude than learns why she wasn't allowed to stay." Outside the conference room, Olivia stood motionless for a few seconds before taking a slow breath. "Well," she whispered with a small, self-conscious smile, "I've certainly had better introductions." She adjusted the strap of her tote bag. Then, because years of teaching children had taught her that embarrassment only grows if you feed it, she straightened her shoulders and continued walking toward the education committee room as though nothing had happened. She didn't notice several employees quietly watching her from the corridor. Nor did she hear one whisper to another, "That's the first person the boss has personally ordered removed in years." Another glanced toward the closed conference room. Then why does he still look like he's watching the hallway? By the following Monday, Olivia had almost convinced herself the embarrassing incident at the Moretti Foundation was behind her. Almost. She stood in front of 23 energetic 5-year-olds while they sat cross-legged on a brightly colored rug. "All right," she announced. "Today's question." 23 tiny hands shot into the air. "What makes someone important?" "Money!" one little boy shouted. "A castle!" another guessed. "A puppy!" declared a girl wearing glitter-covered shoes. Olivia smiled. Interesting answers. She drew 2 stick figures on the whiteboard. "Imagine one person is rich." She pointed to the first drawing. "The other is kind." She pointed to the second. "If both walk into a room where someone is crying..." She paused. "Who becomes important?" The classroom grew unexpectedly quiet. Little Ethan raised his hand. "The one who notices." Olivia's smile softened. "Exactly." Children had a remarkable talent for finding truths adults complicated. That afternoon, her classroom door opened just before dismissal. The school principal stepped inside. "Miss Carter." "Yes?" The Moretti Foundation called. Olivia blinked. They did. They're asking if you'll continue volunteering for their children's literacy program. She frowned. I assumed they'd prefer someone else after. The principal smiled knowingly. After whatever happened at headquarters? Olivia sighed. News travels fast. It does. She considered the invitation for only a few seconds. The children came first, always. If the program helps them, she nodded. I'll volunteer. 3 days later, Olivia arrived at the Foundation's Children's Learning Center, carrying 2 boxes of picture books donated by parents. Unlike the imposing headquarters downtown, the learning center buzzed with cheerful chaos. Children raced through reading corners. Volunteers assembled craft tables. Teachers debated whether finger paint counted as washable. It absolutely doesn't, one muttered. Olivia laughed. I've been fighting that battle for years. Within minutes, she was surrounded by children, asking whether today's story featured dragons. It features vegetables. Several groans echoed dramatically. Miss Carter! They're heroic vegetables. The children immediately changed their minds. One volunteer whispered to another, How does she do that? I honestly have no idea. An hour later, a black luxury sedan rolled quietly into the parking area outside. The chatter among staff changed instantly. One volunteer peeked through the window. Oh no, another groaned. He's here. Olivia looked up. Who? The boss. She blinked. The foundation director? No, the actual boss. Before Olivia could ask another question, Matteo Moretti entered the building. The atmosphere shifted almost imperceptibly. Security personnel straightened. Managers checked schedules. Even conversations became quieter. Matteo acknowledged everyone with brief nods as he walked through the center. His expression remained composed. Professional. Detached. Olivia watched him for exactly 2 seconds before returning to the children. So, she opened a picture book. Where were we? The broccoli dragon, the children shouted. Matteo paused. His eyes briefly settled on the reading circle. Olivia was wearing a paper crown. One of the children had decorated with crooked stickers. She didn't notice him watching. She was currently pretending to negotiate peace between a dragon and 3 stubborn carrots. One corner of Matteo's mouth almost moved. Almost. Beside him, his chief of security quietly cleared his throat. Boss? Matteo looked away. Security inspection. Of the reading circle? The entire building. Naturally. Later that afternoon, Olivia searched the supply closet. She frowned. We're almost out of crayons again. One volunteer sighed. The budget's tight this month. We'll make it work. We always do. Olivia smiled. Children care more about imagination than perfect supplies. The conversation ended there, or so she believed. The following morning, a delivery truck arrived. Boxes, dozens of them. Crayons, construction paper, glue sticks, paint, child-sized scissors, even replacement shelves. The delivery driver scratched his head. I've never delivered this much art equipment before. The program coordinator stared at the paperwork. No sender listed. Olivia examined the invoice. Everything had already been paid. She laughed softly. Perhaps the supply fairy finally found us. Across town, Matteo signed another document. His financial director looked over the expense report. Should I list this under educational grants? No. Anonymous donation? Yes. The director hesitated. You remembered the exact brand of crayons. They don't break easily. You noticed that? They're used by children. The director wisely chose not to ask further questions. Over the next several weeks, an unusual pattern developed. Every single literacy event. Matteo somehow appeared.
If children visited the museum, he happened to inspect museum security. If volunteers organized a park reading day, he reviewed public safety arrangements. If books were distributed at a hospital, he arrived to evaluate emergency protocols. After the fifth coincidence, even the capos noticed. One leaned toward another. 5 inspections. I counted 6. I'm starting a betting pool. For what? How many security inspections happen next week? Another capo shook his head. My money's on 3. Too low. The boss has become extremely concerned about children's libraries. Olivia remained blissfully unaware. She simply found the situation mildly amusing. One afternoon, she spotted Matteo standing near the playground, while security guards discreetly watched the surrounding streets. She approached with a friendly smile. Good afternoon. He nodded once. Miss Carter. She glanced around. Everything safe today? Yes. So, she folded her arms thoughtfully. What dangerous criminal were you expecting? No one. Then why so many inspections? He answered without hesitation. Routine. She tilted her head. You have a fascinating definition of routine. Silence. Then, unexpectedly, he asked, Chamomile? Olivia blinked. I'm sorry? The volunteer lounge. He pointed toward the building. They're serving chamomile tea. Her favorite. She frowned in confusion. How did you know I like chamomile? Matteo paused for half a heartbeat. The kitchen keeps records. They keep records of tea? Efficient kitchens do. Before she could ask another question, he turned toward one of his security officers. Report. The conversation was clearly over. Olivia watched him walk away. What a very strange man. Behind Matteo, the security officer spoke quietly. Boss. Yes. The kitchen doesn't keep tea records. I know. You just admitted something impossible. Matteo's expression didn't change. Did I? Yes. Unfortunate. The officer looked toward Olivia, who was now helping 2 children build an uneven block tower, then back at his employer. Should I be worried? No. I think you're lying. I frequently do. Usually to criminals. Matteo continued walking. This time, he glanced back once toward the playground. Apparently to myself. Meanwhile, inside the volunteer lounge, Olivia accepted a warm cup of chamomile from the smiling kitchen manager. Compliments of the foundation. She laughed. The boss certainly has the most unusual hobbies. The elderly kitchen manager smiled into a teacup. Oh, Miss Carter, if only you knew.
Spring arrived quietly, bringing with it a busier schedule for the Moretti Foundation than ever before. The annual Children's Learning Festival was only 6 weeks away, and every department inside the foundation seemed to be running in 3 different directions at once. Teachers coordinated workshops. Volunteers organized reading corners. Donors finalized scholarship announcements. Security teams inspected every venue twice. Or, according to the capos, for the 9th time. Inside the foundation's main operations room, 3 senior capos stood around a whiteboard. One of them uncapped a marker. I'm updating the numbers. Another folded his arms. What numbers? Our investigation. The police investigation? No. He drew another tally mark. The boss's security inspections. The youngest capo burst into laughter. You're actually keeping score. Scientific observation requires documentation. He stepped back proudly. Monday, school visit. Tuesday, library inspection. Wednesday, children's hospital. Thursday, volunteer orientation. Friday, kindergarten fundraiser. 5 marks. 5 consecutive days. The 3rd capo stared at the board. We're witnessing history. Just then, Matteo entered the room. The marker disappeared so quickly, it nearly flew across the office. Matteo glanced once at the whiteboard. What are those? The eldest capo answered without hesitation. Maintenance records. For stick figures. Creative maintenance. Matteo looked at them for a long moment. I see. He walked away. The room remained silent until the elevator doors closed. Then all three burst into laughter. He definitely knew. He absolutely knew. But he pretended not to, which somehow makes it even funnier. Across the city, Olivia's classroom was unusually noisy. Not because the children were misbehaving, because they were baking cookies, or at least attempting to. Flour covered nearly every surface. One little girl proudly announced, "I made a cloud." You spilled flour. I made an edible cloud. Olivia laughed. I'll allow that. By the end of the afternoon, dozens of slightly uneven cookies sat cooling on trays. Each child carefully decorated a paper bag. One for hospital nurses, one for firefighters, one for the foundation volunteers. One little boy raised his hand. What about the scary suit people? The security guards? He nodded. They never smile. Olivia considered that. They smile. When? When people aren't looking. The children looked skeptical. Let's test my theory. The following morning, Olivia arrived at Foundation headquarters carrying 2 large baskets. Security guard Daniel opened the front door. His expression remained as serious as always. Good morning, Miss Carter. Morning. She handed him a paper bag. For you. He blinked. Me? And everyone working the front entrance. He slowly looked inside. Chocolate chip cookies. Each bag carried childish handwriting. Thank you for keeping us safe. Daniel cleared his throat. He looked genuinely speechless. They made these yesterday. I've never received cookies while on duty. Then today's a special day. By lunchtime, every security guard in the building had a paper bag sitting beside their workstation. Several tried pretending they weren't delighted. None succeeded. That afternoon, Matteo arrived for another routine inspection. As he crossed the lobby, he noticed something unusual. Every guard looked happy. One even waved at him. That almost never happened. Matteo stopped beside Daniel. What happened? Daniel immediately stood straighter. Nothing, boss. You appear cheerful. Do I? You frightened accounting. Daniel reluctantly held up the paper bag. Miss Carter. Matteo looked down at the handwritten note. Tiny, uneven letters. Colorful stickers. Children's handwriting. I see. Daniel smiled. They made enough for every shift. Another guard called from across the lobby. Mine had extra chocolate. I noticed. The third guard joined in. I think she remembered Frank can't eat peanuts. Matteo's eyes shifted. She remembered dietary restrictions? Daniel nodded. All 32 employees. Matteo didn't answer immediately. Instead, he quietly walked toward the elevators. One thought stayed with him longer than expected. She noticed everything. Several days later, preparations began for the Foundation's annual fundraising speech. Professional speechwriters filled a conference room with laptops, drafts, and presentation slides. Matteo stood at the front. This version, he glanced through several pages, is acceptable. The writers visibly relaxed. Then the conference room door opened. Olivia poked her head inside. Oh, she froze. I thought this was conference room B. One assistant smiled. It is. She looked around. So why is everyone dressed like they're negotiating world peace? No one answered. Matteo simply held up the speech. Preparation. Oh. She started backing toward the hallway. I'll leave you to it. Before she reached the door, one elderly board member spoke. Miss Carter. She turned. Would you mind listening to one paragraph? The speechwriters exchanged uncertain looks. Matteo neither agreed nor objected. Olivia shrugged. If you're sure. The chairman nodded toward Matteo. Please. Matteo began reading. Our philanthropic initiatives establish multidimensional educational frameworks, facilitating long-term developmental opportunities for underserved juvenile demographics. Silence. Olivia blinked once, then twice. Can I say something? The chairman smiled. Please. She looked directly at Matteo. Children wouldn't understand that sentence. He lowered the pages. This speech isn't for children. She nodded thoughtfully. I know. Another pause. But adults appreciate simple words too. The room became very quiet. Olivia stepped closer. What if? He gently pointed to one line. Instead of saying all this, she smiled. You simply say, every child deserves someone who believes in them before they believe in themselves. No one spoke. One speechwriter slowly lowered his pen. Another whispered, "That's better." A third quietly deleted half the page. Matteo studied Olivia for several long seconds. You removed 38 words. They weren't helping. You noticed immediately. I teach 5-year-olds. She smiled. They're brutally honest editors. The fundraising gala took place 3 days later. Matteo delivered the revised speech. No complicated vocabulary. No unnecessary formality. Just clear, sincere words. When he finished, the audience stood. A full standing ovation. Board members applauded. Teachers wiped away tears. Several donors admitted afterward it was the most heartfelt speech the foundation had ever presented. Backstage, one speechwriter approached Matteo. Boss. Yes? Miss Carter was right. I know. You aren't angry? No. Should we invite her to future rehearsals? Matteo pretended to think about it. Only if absolutely necessary. The speechwriter nodded. Understood. As soon as Matteo walked away, he whispered to another writer, schedule every rehearsal around Miss Carter's availability. Within a week, the nickname had spread through the mansion. The boss's unofficial editor. The kitchen staff used it. The drivers used it. The gardeners used it. Even the capos had stopped trying to hide it. One afternoon, Olivia entered the library, carrying a stack of children's books. She paused. 3 capos immediately stood up. Good afternoon. One bowed dramatically. Miss Editor. She laughed. I don't edit people. The youngest capo grinned. You edited the boss. I corrected 1 sentence. You corrected 23. It needed it. The oldest capo nodded solemnly. History will remember your courage. Olivia shook her head, trying not to laugh. You gentlemen spend far too much time together. Occupational hazard. Just then, Matteo entered the library. All 3 capos instantly became serious. Far too serious. He looked from them, to Olivia, then back again. What happened? Nothing. You appear guilty. We're innocent. Matteo narrowed his eyes. The youngest capo failed to suppress a smile. Finally, Matteo looked toward Olivia. Did they bother you? She smiled warmly. They were only informing me that I've apparently acquired a new job title. I see. They called me your unofficial editor. Silence. The 3 capos suddenly found the bookshelf incredibly fascinating. Matteo sighed. Ridiculous. Olivia tilted her head. You don't like it? No. Another pause. It lacks accuracy. The room froze. One capo whispered. He's going to promote her. Instead, Matteo calmly took the speech folder from his briefcase and handed it to Olivia. The education conference. She looked surprised. You want me to read it? If you have time. Her smile widened. I'll return it tomorrow. Matteo nodded once. Good. He walked away with the same composed expression he always wore. Only after the library doors closed did the 3 capos erupt into muffled laughter. The boss just requested editing services. He voluntarily handed her the speech. I owe someone $50. Olivia looked after Matteo, then down at the folder in her hands. She couldn't help smiling. What an incredibly strange hobby that man has. None of them had the heart to tell her. It had stopped being about speeches a long time ago. The Moretti Foundation's annual Children's Hope Banquet was the most anticipated charity event of the year. Unlike the Foundation's educational workshops, this evening belonged to the city's elite: politicians, judges, business magnates, international donors, media executives. Every invitation carried weight. Every seating assignment carried even more. For weeks, an entire planning committee had debated where each guest should sit. Who should face the stage? Who should be near the board? Who should share a table with potential donors? No detail was considered too small. Olivia almost declined the invitation. She stood in her apartment, staring at the elegant envelope, while her best friend, Grace, folded her arms across the sofa. You've been reading that invitation for 10 minutes. I'm thinking. You're overthinking. Olivia sighed. I don't belong at events like this. Grace laughed. You teach children who won the Foundation's biggest education award. I still spend most mornings tying shoelaces. And tonight, you'll spend one evening wearing a nice dress. I don't even own a fancy dress. Grace disappeared into her bedroom without another word. 5 minutes later, she returned carrying a long navy blue gown. Olivia's eyes widened. You've been hiding that. I've been waiting for you to stop making excuses. It's beautiful. I know. It's probably expensive. It was. I can't accept. You accepted 32 handmade macaroni necklaces from your students this year. That's different. No, Grace smiled. You always accept kindness. For once. She gently placed the dress into Olivia's hands. Let someone be kind to you. The ballroom shimmered beneath crystal chandeliers. A string quartet played softly near the stage. Servers moved gracefully between tables covered with white roses and candlelight. Every guest seemed to know exactly where they belonged. Except Olivia. She checked her seating card twice, then a third time. Table 27? She looked around. There were only 20 main banquet tables. A young event coordinator hurried over. Oh, he looked uncomfortable. Miss Carter? Yes? I'm terribly sorry. He hesitated. There was... He searched carefully for polite wording. A last-minute adjustment. I see. He pointed toward the far side of the ballroom. Near the service entrance, several smaller tables had been arranged for musicians, photographers, and catering supervisors. One empty seat remained. There, Olivia followed his gesture, for a brief second. Something inside her sank, not because the table was smaller, not because it was beside the kitchen, but because she suddenly understood. Someone had decided she didn't belong with everyone else. Across the ballroom, Vanessa Crawford noticed Olivia's expression, only for a moment. Then Vanessa approached wearing an effortless smile. She was elegance personified. Her silver gown caught the light perfectly. Every movement appeared carefully rehearsed. Miss Carter. Olivia smiled politely. Good evening. I hope there hasn't been any confusion. Only a little. Vanessa glanced toward the service tables. I'm afraid the committee had to make practical decisions. I understand. Professional educators don't usually belong at the main table. She said it so gently, so pleasantly, that anyone overhearing might mistake it for simple logistics. Not an insult, just unfortunate reality. Nearby guests exchanged brief smiles. A billionaire quietly chuckled into his wineglass. Another guest nodded, as though the arrangement made perfect sense. No one openly mocked Olivia. No one needed to. Sometimes exclusion spoke louder than cruelty. Olivia looked at her seating card once more. then folded it carefully. "Thank you for letting me know." Vanessa blinked. "You aren't upset?" Olivia smiled. "I spend my weekdays eating lunch beside children who believe dinosaurs still exist." She laughed softly. "I've learned that where you sit matters much less than how people feel while sitting beside you." Vanessa's polished smile faltered. "Only slightly. I hope you'll still enjoy the evening." "I'm certain I will." Without another word, Olivia picked up the hem of her dress and calmly walked toward the service tables. Not hurried, not ashamed, simply graceful. The room quietly watched her leave. Something unexpected happened. The polite laughter faded. One elderly donor slowly lowered his glass. A retired judge frowned. A teacher invited from another scholarship program looked visibly uncomfortable. Even several waiters exchanged uncertain glances. There was no dramatic confrontation, only silence. And in that silence, people began questioning themselves. At the main table, Matteo had witnessed every second. He had heard Vanessa's words, seen Olivia's smile, watched her walk away. His expression never changed. One capo sitting beside him whispered, "Boss." No response. "Should we?" "No." The answer came quietly. "But, wait." The capo knew better than to argue. Still, he had worked beside Matteo for 15 years. He recognized that look. It wasn't anger. It was calculation. Olivia reached the service table. Several catering staff members immediately stood. One elderly chef looked horrified. "Miss, I'm so sorry." She smiled warmly. "Please don't apologize. This wasn't our decision." "I know." A young waitress nervously pulled out a chair. "We've never had an honored guest seated here before." Olivia laughed. "Then tonight, we make history." The waitress couldn't help smiling. Within minutes, Olivia was asking everyone's names, where they came from, how long they'd worked at the foundation. She thanked the chef for preparing meals for hundreds of scholarship children every month. "You feed people who spend their lives helping others," she said sincerely. "That makes your work important too." The chef looked down for a moment. No donor had ever thanked him before. Meanwhile, the atmosphere at the main tables became strangely unsettled. Conversation refused to flow naturally. Several guests glanced toward Olivia, far more often than toward the stage. A senator quietly leaned toward another board member. Should someone invite her over? I was thinking the same, but changing seats now might embarrass her further. Across the room, Vanessa maintained her composed smile. Inside, she felt victorious. She hadn't insulted Olivia. She hadn't raised her voice. She had simply placed her exactly where society expected, or so she believed. The evening's master of ceremonies stepped onto the stage. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'll begin our annual fundraising auction in 5 minutes." Applause echoed politely. Staff moved efficiently between tables. Auction items were positioned under soft lighting. Photographers adjusted cameras. Everything appeared perfect, except Matteo hadn't touched his dinner. One capo noticed. "You skipped the soup." Silence. "The steak too." Another silence. "You've been watching table 27 for almost 20 minutes. Matteo calmly folded his napkin. "I've been watching everyone." The capo followed his gaze. He finally understood. Matteo wasn't watching Olivia. He was watching everyone else's reaction to Olivia, who looked uncomfortable, who pretended not to notice, who laughed, who stayed silent, who quietly looked ashamed. He was memorizing every face. At the service table, one little incident drew unexpected attention. A nervous young waiter carrying dessert plates stumbled. The tray tilted. Several expensive porcelain dishes shattered across the floor. The young man's face turned white. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." His hands shook so badly, he couldn't kneel to clean the broken pieces. Before any supervisor reached him, Olivia was already beside him. "Don't move." He stared at her. The floor. Broken porcelain. She smiled gently. "And I'd rather explain one broken plate than one injured waiter." Several nearby guests watched. She accepted a broom from another employee, helped gather every shattered piece, then quietly whispered something that made the young waiter laugh through his embarrassment. No cameras captured the moment. No applause followed. Yet somehow, it became the most genuine act of kindness in the entire ballroom. From across the room, Matteo watched without blinking. Beside him, the eldest capo murmured almost to himself, "She keeps proving the same lesson." "What lesson?" The capo looked toward Olivia as she handed the relieved waiter a fresh dessert plate. "The most important person in any room is always the one making everyone else feel less afraid." Matteo's eyes never left Olivia. "No." The capo looked surprised. Matteo spoke quietly. "The most important person is the one who does it even when no one is watching." At that exact moment, the master of ceremonies returned to the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, our charity auction will now begin." Matteo slowly rose from his chair. The room instinctively fell silent. Something unexpected was about to happen. Matteo Moretti rose from his chair. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't tap his glass. He simply stood. That alone was enough. The ballroom gradually fell silent. Conversations dissolved one by one until even the musicians lowered their instruments. The master of ceremonies stepped away from the microphone without being asked. Everyone instinctively looked toward the man who almost never spoke more than necessary. Matteo walked calmly onto the stage. Behind him, the first auction item waited beneath a velvet cloth. He ignored it. Instead, he looked across the room. His gaze moved slowly from table to table. Politicians, business leaders, board members, teachers, volunteers, kitchen staff, security guards. Then, at last, it rested briefly on Olivia. She still sat beside the catering team. She gave him a small, encouraging smile, assuming he was about to begin the fundraiser. She had no idea she was the reason the auction had stopped. Matteo reached the microphone. "The auction can wait." A faint murmur passed through the ballroom. The auction had never been delayed. Not once. In fact, he folded his hands behind his back. "I'd like to ask everyone a question." No one interrupted. "When you were a child," his voice remained calm, "who taught you your first lesson about kindness?" The room stayed quiet for a heartbeat. Then an elderly donor answered, "My mother." Another guest smiled. "My grandfather." A judge added, "My first-grade teacher." One by one, more voices joined. A neighbor. "My father." A music instructor. A coach. A nun. A kindergarten teacher. The answers spread naturally through the ballroom. Parents. Grandparents. Mentors. Teachers. People who had shaped lives long before careers or fortunes ever existed. Matteo listened without expression. When the final answer faded away, he nodded once. "Interesting." Silence returned. He looked toward the main banquet tables. "Tonight." He spoke slowly enough that every word settled into the room. "We placed the only kindergarten teacher here beside the kitchen." No one moved. No one even reached for a glass. The sentence struck far harder than anger ever could. Several guests instinctively turned toward table 27. For the first time that evening, they truly saw where Olivia was sitting. Matteo stepped down from the stage. His polished shoes echoed softly across the ballroom floor. No security followed him. No capos moved. He walked alone. Straight toward Olivia. The room watched every step. Vanessa's confident smile disappeared. Not dramatically. Simply, little by little. Matteo stopped beside Olivia's chair. She looked up at him, slightly confused. Mr. Moretti. Without speaking, he reached for the empty chair beside his own seat at the head table. One of the staff hurried to help. Matteo stopped him with a slight shake of his head. "I'll do it." He carried the chair himself. Across one end of the ballroom, every guest watched the city's most feared mafia boss carry a chair. Not because no one else could, because he chose to. He placed it beside his own seat, then turned back toward the audience. "If anyone believes," his voice remained perfectly controlled, "that Miss Carter belongs somewhere else." He let the sentence hang in the air. "You are welcome to explain why." Silence. Not uncomfortable silence. Honest silence. No billionaire spoke. No politician objected. No board member defended the seating chart. Even Vanessa remained perfectly still, because for the first time, no explanation sounded reasonable. Matteo waited another few seconds, then nodded once. "I thought so." He turned toward Olivia. "Would you join me?" The catering staff looked ready to burst into applause, but wisely restrained themselves. The elderly chef whispered, "Go on, miss." "You've kept us company long enough." Olivia smiled at each of them. "Thank you." She stood. Before leaving, she quietly hugged the young waiter who had dropped the dessert trays earlier. "You're doing wonderfully." His eyes reddened. "I'll remember that." She simply smiled and followed Matteo. Every step toward the head table felt strangely unreal, not because people were staring. She'd grown used to curious looks throughout her life. No. What surprised her was Matteo. He wasn't walking ahead of her. He matched her pace. Exactly. Neither faster nor slower. As though silently insisting they arrive together. When they reached the main table, Matteo pulled back the chair. Olivia stopped beside him. Leaning slightly closer so only he could hear, she whispered, "You could have done this earlier." For the first time that evening, for the first time many people could ever remember, Matteo smiled. It wasn't large, just enough to soften the sharp lines of his face. "I know." She waited. I was waiting. He glanced briefly around the ballroom. For everyone else to realize they were wrong before I told them. Olivia looked at him for several seconds. Then she laughed. A genuine laugh. Warm, bright, completely unforced. "You really enjoy dramatic timing." "I've been told that." "You planned this." I adjusted the schedule. "The auction?" "Yes." "The speech?" "Yes." "The chair?" "That part was improvised." She shook her head. "I never know when you're serious." "I rarely do." She smiled again. I noticed. Around them, the tension dissolved almost instantly. People who had avoided looking at Olivia now greeted her warmly. A retired school principal stood first. "Miss Carter, I owe you an apology." She blinked. "For what?" "I noticed your table." I said nothing. Olivia answered gently. "Then perhaps next time." She smiled kindly. "Say something for the next person." The older woman nodded with moist eyes. "I will." Nearby, the senator who had tried to escort Olivia weeks earlier approached. He offered his hand. "I should have walked over sooner tonight." Olivia shook it warmly. "You came now. Better late than never." Exactly. One by one, guests crossed the ballroom. Not because Matteo ordered them, because they suddenly understood what they had failed to see. They congratulated Olivia, asked about her students, her literacy programs, her classroom. Within minutes, conversations about stock markets and political campaigns had transformed into stories about favorite teachers. Someone admitted a first-grade teacher had changed his life. Another confessed she still wrote letters to her piano instructor every Christmas. The atmosphere became unexpectedly human. At the edge of the room, several capos watched the transformation with quiet amusement. The youngest whispered, The boss didn't humiliate anyone. The eldest shook his head. He didn't need to. He simply reminded them who they used to be. Daniel, the security chief, folded his arms. I've protected him for 12 years. I've never seen him win an argument without arguing. Across the ballroom, Vanessa remained seated. Perfect posture, perfect makeup, perfect silence. For the first time in years, she had no graceful way to recover. She hadn't broken any written rule. Yet somehow, everyone understood she had violated something much more important: respect. She quietly rose from her chair and walked toward Olivia. Several guests held their breath. Vanessa stopped. I believe, she chose every word carefully, I misjudged tonight. Olivia looked at her, not triumphantly, simply patiently. We all misjudge people sometimes. Vanessa searched her face, almost expecting sarcasm. There was none. You aren't angry? Olivia considered the question. I teach children. They remind me every day that embarrassing someone is easy. She smiled softly. Helping them feel included takes much more effort. Vanessa lowered her eyes. For perhaps the first time in a very long while, she had nothing clever to say. As she walked away, Matteo quietly observed the exchange. You forgave her. Olivia glanced sideways. I accepted her apology. Those aren't always the same. No. She picked up her water glass. But it's a good place to begin. Matteo looked at her a long moment. Then, almost imperceptibly, he nodded. It was the smallest gesture of the evening. Yet somehow, it meant more than every standing ovation that had filled the ballroom. The story that began with an awkward misunderstanding quietly transformed into something no one at the Moretti Foundation could have predicted. Not overnight, not because of one dramatic evening, but because, over the months that followed, people kept noticing the same simple truth. Whenever Olivia Carter entered a room, the room somehow became kinder. The Foundation's board of directors gathered again 6 weeks after the annual banquet. Unlike previous meetings, this agenda contained only one item that sparked genuine discussion. The newly created position of Director of Children's Education. The chairman adjusted his glasses. We have received 3 external applications. Another board member nodded. All highly qualified. A third looked down at the evaluation reports. One candidate already works for us. No one needed to ask who. The chairman smiled. Shall we vote? The ballots were distributed, collected, counted. He looked up with visible satisfaction. Unanimous. Not one vote against. Not one abstention. One elderly board member laughed softly. I suppose this is the easiest decision we've made all year. Another smiled. We aren't promoting Miss Carter because the boss favors her. Several people chuckled. We're promoting her because every employee, volunteer, teacher, parent, and child somehow ends up trusting her. The chairman nodded. Influence earned through kindness lasts much longer than influence borrowed from power. No one disagreed. When Olivia was called into the boardroom later that afternoon, she assumed someone needed help organizing another children's event. She carried a folder filled with lesson plans. I'm sorry if I'm late. The chairman stood. You aren't. He slid a document toward her. We'd like to offer you a position. She glanced down, then looked again. Her eyes widened. Director? She immediately shook her head. I think there's been a mistake. There hasn't. I've never managed an organization this large. One board member smiled warmly. You've been managing 30 energetic kindergarten children for years, another added. Compared to that. He glanced toward several directors around the table. Adults are surprisingly easy. Laughter spread through the room. Even Olivia laughed. I'll need help. You'll have it. You'll have it. I'll probably make mistakes. So will everyone else. She looked around the table. Every face reflected confidence. Not obligation, not pity, belief. Slowly, she smiled. I'd be honored. The foundation changed in subtle ways after Olivia accepted. Teachers became more involved in planning major events. Children's opinions were included in education programs. The staff cafeteria added healthier meals after Olivia politely pointed out that people caring for children should probably eat lunch themselves. The kitchen staff proudly renamed one soup, Miss Carter's reminder, because she never allowed anyone to skip meals. Especially Matteo. Unfortunately for him, she had also become impossible to ignore. One afternoon, Matteo walked through headquarters, carrying 3 folders while reviewing contracts with 2 attorneys. His pace never slowed. His attention never wandered. Until Olivia appeared. Matteo. He stopped immediately. Both attorneys exchanged knowing glances. You skipped lunch. I've been occupied. She held out a neatly wrapped sandwich. You've been stubborn. One attorney quietly whispered to the other. Same thing. Matteo accepted the sandwich with practiced dignity. I intended to eat later. When? This afternoon. It is this afternoon. Silence. You've trapped me with grammar. She smiled sweetly. I learned from the best. One attorney coughed into his hand to hide a laugh. The other completely failed. Speech rehearsals became another source of endless entertainment. Every major presentation followed the same routine. The speechwriters produced a draft. Matteo approved it. Olivia read it. A red pen appeared. Half the unnecessary words disappeared. One afternoon, Matteo stood before a mirror, rehearsing an address for an international education conference. He paused, midway through the second paragraph. Thoughts? Olivia looked down at the pages. You used commence 3 times. It's an appropriate word. It is. She smiled. So is begin. It sounds less formal. It sounds more human. He sighed with theatrical resignation. You always remove my favorite words. You keep choosing words that need dictionaries. One speechwriter quietly leaned toward another. I give him 10 seconds. For what? He'll change it. Exactly 8 seconds later, Matteo crossed out commence and replaced it with begin. The speechwriter counted silently. I was close. The nickname refused to disappear. The boss's unofficial editor. Eventually, even Matteo stopped denying it, mostly because no one believed him anymore. One morning, a young capo accidentally addressed Olivia by her real title, Director Carter. The older capo beside him frowned. No? What? Everyone knows she's the editor? Olivia laughed. I have an actual position now. So does the boss. And we still call him boss. She couldn't argue with that. Winter arrived. Snow dusted the foundation gardens. Children built uneven snowmen outside the learning center, while security guards pretended not to help. Olivia caught Daniel secretly replacing a snowman's crooked carrot nose. I saw that. I was checking structural stability. Of a snowman? Security inspection. She burst into laughter. You've all been spending too much time with Matteo. Daniel smiled. Probably. That same afternoon, Matteo watched from his office window as Olivia helped several children wrap scarves around the snowmen. One little girl reached up and asked, Miss Olivia? Yes. Is Mr. Matteo always serious? Olivia looked toward the window. Their eyes met across the courtyard. She smiled. Only until someone reminds him to smile. The little girl waved enthusiastically toward the office. Matteo hesitated. Then, very slightly, he waved back. The child gasped dramatically. I knew he could do it! Several months later, after another successful foundation event, the senior staff gathered in the mansion library for coffee. Conversation drifted comfortably from scholarship programs to holiday decorations. The younger capos had begun arguing about something unexpectedly important. Finally, one of them approached Matteo. "Boss? Yes?" "We have a question." Matteo looked up from the report he was reading. "Go ahead." The young capo hesitated. "Who's the only person allowed to interrupt you?" The room became unusually quiet. Everyone knew the answer. They simply wanted to hear him say it. At that exact moment, Olivia walked into the library, carrying another stack of documents. She didn't notice the conversation. She noticed only one thing. "Matteo." He looked up. "You forgot your lunch again." A few people struggled not to smile. She placed the lunchbox on his desk. "You promised." "I became distracted." "You became impossible." "I've heard that before. Usually from me. Frequently." The room waited. The young capo looked expectantly toward Matteo. Without hesitation, without embarrassment, he answered. "The only person brave enough to improve me." Silence. Olivia froze. "Was that your answer?" He nodded. "I believe so." She folded her arms. "So that's your romantic confession?" A faint smile appeared. "I had a longer speech. What happened to it?" He looked directly into her eyes. "You edited it." For one perfectly suspended second, no one spoke. Then the library erupted with laughter. Even the sternest capos couldn't hide their amusement. Daniel shook his head. "I've waited years to hear the boss admit defeat." "I didn't admit defeat." "No?" Matteo looked toward Olivia. She was still smiling, still looking at him with that mixture of warmth and playful disbelief that somehow made the world's most intimidating man seem almost ordinary. He quietly reached for her hand. She slipped her fingers into his without hesitation. "Good." She gave his hand a gentle squeeze. It was too long anyway. Matteo looked around at the people who had become something more than employees, more than allies. They were a family, built not only through loyalty, but through kindness. For years he had believed strength meant standing alone. Olivia had never argued with that belief. She had simply lived differently until he discovered another definition for himself. Outside the library windows, children's laughter echoed across the snowy courtyard. Inside, the city's most feared mafia boss smiled without hiding it. For the first time in many years, Matteo Moretti realized that losing every playful argument to one warm-hearted, plus-size kindergarten teacher felt infinitely better than winning every battle in the world.